People used to say that nobody could control her. The drivers said it. The house staff whispered it in the kitchen. Even the security guards at the main gate believed it. She was the only daughter of one of the richest men in the country. And from the outside, her life looked perfect. She lived in a house so large that some rooms were never even used. Cars waited for her before she asked. Designers sent clothes before she chose them. But inside that large house, something was always missing. She learned at a young age that money solved problems quickly. If she didn't like a teacher, she was moved. If she broke something expensive, it was replaced the next day. If a story appeared in the news about her late-night behavior, her father's team handled it before breakfast. There were no real consequences, only cleanups. And over time, she began to test how far she could go. At school, she was known for speaking her mind without caring who felt hurt. If she was bored, she walked out of class. If she disagreed, she argued loudly. Some students tried to be her friend because of her status. Others stayed away because they were tired of the drama that followed her. Teachers described her as intelligent but difficult. She described herself as honest. Her father rarely attended school meetings. When he did, the room felt different. His presence was heavy. Principals smiled too much. Teachers softened their words. On the drive home, he would speak about reputation, about how their family name carried weight. He spoke about discipline and control. But what she heard was something else. She heard that she was a problem that needed managing. Her mother had passed away when she was younger. The house became quieter after that. Her father became busier. Meetings filled his calendar. Business trips stretched longer. The dining table that once held warm conversations now felt like a formal meeting space. Most evenings, she ate alone while staff moved silently around her. She didn't cry in front of people. Instead, she grew sharper. If someone tried to correct her, she pushed back twice as hard. If someone tried to guide her, she questioned their authority. It wasn't that she enjoyed hurting people. It was that she felt tired of being treated like an image instead of a person. The headline started small. A photo of her leaving a party too late. A short video of her arguing with a security guard outside a hotel. Then came louder stories. A public disagreement at a charity event. A sarcastic comment caught on camera during a speech her father was giving. Each time, the media painted her as spoiled and out of control. Her father's office worked fast. Articles disappeared. Videos were removed. Statements were released. But at home, the air grew colder. He began speaking to her through assistants. Schedules were adjusted without asking her. Security followed her more closely. It felt less like protection and more like surveillance. One evening, after another uncomfortable appearance at a public function, the argument finally exploded. She had refused to smile for photographers. She had walked away from guests in the middle of conversations. When they returned home, her father did not go to his office like usual. He waited in the main sitting room. The room was large, with tall windows and expensive art on the walls. Yet it felt smaller that night. He stood near the fireplace, his hands behind his back. She stood near the doorway, arms crossed, ready to defend herself before he even spoke. He told her she was embarrassing the family. He told her that people were watching, that investors were asking questions, that behavior like hers damaged trust. His voice was controlled, but anger sat underneath every word. She listened, but her chest felt tight. When he paused, she spoke without thinking. She asked him when he had last asked how she was feeling. She asked if reputation mattered more than his own daughter. The words came out fast, almost shaking. For a moment, there was silence. He looked surprised, maybe even hurt. But instead of answering her question, he returned to the topic of discipline. He said she needed structure, distance, perspective. The next morning, she learned what that meant. Her father owned several companies, including a property development firm that managed residential and office buildings. One of those properties was located in another part of the city, away from their main home and away from the circles she moved in. She would be staying there for some time, not as a guest in luxury, but in one of the smaller apartments connected to the building's management wing. She thought he was joking at first. He wasn't. Security would still be present, but limited. Her credit cards would have restrictions. Public appearances were canceled. Social events removed from her calendar. She would finish her studies through online sessions. It was not a punishment announced to the world. It was quiet and private, but it felt heavy. When she arrived at the building 2 days later, she stepped out of the car with sunglasses, hiding her expression. The building was clean, but simple. It was not covered in marble or grand decorations. People moved in and out, carrying grocery bags and office files. No one looked at her twice. The apartment prepared for her was comfortable, but not impressive. A small living area, a basic kitchen, a bedroom with plain walls. She walked through it slowly, touching surfaces as if checking whether they were real. For the first time in years, there were no staff waiting inside the space. That first night felt strange. The quiet was different from the silence of her large family home. There were sounds from neighbors, footsteps in hallways, a door closing somewhere above. It reminded her that other people lived normal lives around her. She told herself she didn't care. She told herself this was temporary, that her father would eventually give up and call her back. But as the days passed, she began to feel something she hadn't expected. Boredom without attention. There were no parties here, no photographers, no people trying to impress her. When she walked through the lobby, residents nodded politely and continued their conversations. She wasn't the center of anything. One afternoon, she decided to explore the building out of pure restlessness. She rode the elevator to different floors, pretending she had a reason. She stepped outside into the small courtyard where children were playing. A few parents sat on benches, talking about everyday things like school fees and grocery prices. She stood there for a moment, unsure where to place herself. A little child ran past her chasing a ball, laughing freely. No one rushed to stop the child. No one worried about cameras. The simplicity felt unfamiliar. Later that evening, she returned to her apartment and sat by the window. The city lights were still bright, but from this angle, they looked distant. She thought about her mother, about how different things had been when she was younger, about how her father used to smile more. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to admit that maybe she wasn't angry at the world. Maybe she was hurt. Her phone buzzed with messages from friends asking when she would return. Some joked about her exile. Others complained that parties were boring, without her drama. She stared at the screen and felt tired. None of them asked if she was okay. The next morning, she woke earlier than usual because sunlight came directly through the thin curtains. There was no assistant knocking to remind her of meetings. No schedule waiting on the table. Just a quiet day ahead. She stepped out into the hallway and noticed a man mopping the floor near the elevator. He looked focused, moving carefully so the surface shined. He wore a simple uniform and old shoes that had clearly seen many shifts. He nodded politely when he saw her, but did not stare. She gave a short nod back and pressed the elevator button. For some reason, the simple moment stayed in her mind longer than expected. He hadn't looked impressed. He hadn't looked nervous. He had simply continued his work. Back in her apartment, she leaned against the door and let out a slow breath. Nobody here seemed interested in controlling her. But nobody here seemed interested in being controlled by her either. Maybe that was the point. As evening came again, she sat alone at the small kitchen table with a cup of tea she had made herself. It wasn't perfect. It was too strong. But it was hers. And as she looked around the modest apartment, she felt something unfamiliar growing quietly inside her. For the first time, she was in a place where her father's name carried less power, where her attitude brought no special reaction, where life moved on whether she liked it or not. She didn't know it yet, but this quiet building was about to change everything she thought she understood about control, strength, and herself. The days began to follow a simple pattern, something she was not used to. Morning light came through the thin curtains, and the sounds of people starting their routines filled the air. Doors opened and closed. Footsteps moved quickly down the hall. Somewhere nearby, a radio played softly, switching between news and music. Life here moved without waiting for her. At first, she stayed inside most of the time. She scrolled through her phone, watched shows she barely followed, and slept at odd hours. But boredom has a way of pushing people out of their comfort zones. After a few days, she started going downstairs more often, sometimes just to sit in the lobby and watch people pass by. She noticed things she had never paid attention to before. A woman who worked late shifts always rushing around sunset, looking tired but relieved to be home. An elderly man walked his small dog every morning at the same time, stopping to talk to anyone who would listen. A group of children waited for the school bus, arguing loudly and then laughing as if nothing mattered. And almost every day, she noticed the same man cleaning. He was usually there early in the morning or later in the afternoon, moving quietly through hallways, stairwells, and common areas. He cleaned floors, wiped railings, and fixed small things that others ignored. He didn't rush, but he didn't waste time either. He worked like someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. She didn't know why she kept noticing him. Maybe it was because he felt real. No forced smiles. No fake respect. Just work. One afternoon, she stepped into the elevator at the same time he did. The space was small, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. She glanced at the floor numbers lighting up, and then at the bucket he was holding. "You're always working," she said, without thinking too much about it. He looked at her, surprised but not offended. "Someone has to," he replied simply. There was no sarcasm in his voice, no attempt to impress her. The elevator reached her floor, and she stepped out. As the doors closed, she felt something strange. The conversation had been short, almost meaningless, yet it stayed with her longer than most talks she had in the past. That evening, she found herself thinking about him while eating dinner alone. It bothered her. She was used to people thinking about her, not the other way around. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual. She told herself it was just because she couldn't sleep. When she stepped into the hallway, she saw him again, cleaning near the stairwell. A small child sat on the floor nearby, coloring in a notebook. The sight slowed her steps. The man paused his work and handed the child a bottle of water. "Not too close to the stairs," he said gently. The child nodded seriously and went back to coloring. She stood there longer than she meant to. She had never seen him with the child before. The way he spoke was calm and careful. Not strict, not cold, just present. "That your kid?" she asked, surprised at herself again. He nodded. "Yeah, school's closed today. Couldn't afford a babysitter." She didn't know what to say to that. In her world, problems were solved with a phone call and a payment. Babysitters, tutors, drivers. Everything was arranged. She nodded slowly and walked past, but her thoughts stayed behind. Later that day, she sat in the courtyard, watching the same child run around with others. The man watched from a bench, keeping one eye on his work and one on the child. He didn't hover, but he didn't look away either. She realized something uncomfortable. No one had ever watched over her like that. In the evening, she ran into him again near the laundry room. This time, she spoke first. "Doesn't it get tiring, doing this every day?" He shrugged. "It does. But tired isn't the worst thing in the world." She frowned. "What is, then?" He thought for a moment. "Feeling useless. Feeling like you don't matter to anyone." The words landed harder than she expected. She didn't respond right away. He picked up his bucket and continued working as if he hadn't said anything important. Over the next few days, these small moments continued. Short conversations, simple questions, honest answers. He never asked her who she was or why she lived there. He didn't seem curious about her background. To him, she was just another resident. That bothered her more than open judgment ever had. One afternoon, she finally asked, "You don't recognize me, do you?" He looked confused. "Should I?" She hesitated. People usually reacted differently when they learned who she was. Some got excited. Some got nervous. Some tried too hard to impress her. Never mind," she said quietly. He nodded and smiled slightly. "Doesn't matter to me." She walked away, feeling strangely lighter and strangely irritated at the same time. That night, she thought about her father's world. Meetings, power, control. People valued for what they could offer. And then she thought about this building, about this man who worked all day and still found time to sit with his child and talk to strangers honestly. She wondered what it would feel like to be needed for something real. The following weekend, the building held a small maintenance day. Residents were asked to clear hallways while repairs were done. She watched from a distance as the man organized tools and spoke with others. People listened to him, not because he had authority, but because he knew what he was doing. When a pipe burst unexpectedly, causing water to spread across the floor, people panicked. He didn't. He shut off the valve, guided residents away from the area, and started cleaning without raising his voice. She saw respect in their eyes. Quiet respect. After things settled, she handed him a towel without thinking. Their hands brushed briefly. He thanked her and went back to work. "You didn't have to help," he said. "I wanted to," she replied. That simple choice stayed with her. Later that night, she received a message from her father's assistant reminding her about restrictions and expectations. The words felt distant, almost unreal now. For the first time, she didn't feel like reacting. No anger, no urge to rebel, just a calm realization. Nobody in this building was trying to control her. And this man, who had nothing on paper, had shown her more respect than most people in her life ever had. She sat by the window again, watching lights turn off one by one in the building across the street. Somewhere below, she heard the sound of a child laughing. She didn't know what this connection meant yet. She only knew that something inside her had shifted, and she had a feeling that this was only the beginning. By the third week in the building, her routine had changed without her noticing. She no longer slept until noon. She no longer spent hours scrolling through her phone. Mornings felt quieter, but fuller somehow. She made her own breakfast now, even if it was simple: toast, tea, sometimes eggs when she felt like trying. She started greeting people in the hallway, not because she had to, but because it felt natural. Some smiled back, some nodded and moved on. No one treated her like a headline. She was just another person living there. She still thought about leaving, about going back to her old life, where everything was fast and loud. But the idea no longer felt comforting. It felt exhausting. The man continued his work every day, steady and calm. She noticed the details now. How he checked corners others ignored. How he fixed loose handles without being asked. How he remembered which residents liked to talk and which preferred silence. One afternoon, she found him sitting on the steps outside the building, tying the child's shoelaces. The child kept moving, impatient to run back and play. "Hold still," he said softly, smiling despite the struggle. She stood nearby, watching. "You're patient," she said. He laughed quietly. "I wasn't always. Life teaches you." That answer stayed with her. Later that day, she saw the child crying near the courtyard. Another child had taken a toy. She expected shouting or anger. Instead, the man knelt down, listened carefully, and spoke in a low voice. The crying stopped. The toy was returned. The children went back to playing. She felt something twist inside her chest. That evening, she knocked on his door without fully thinking it through. When he opened it, he looked surprised but not uncomfortable. The child peeked from behind his leg, curious. "I made too much food," she said quickly. "I thought maybe—" He hesitated for a second, then nodded. "That's kind of you. Come in." The apartment was small and simple, clean but worn. A couch with faded fabric, a small table near the window, drawings taped to the wall with uneven tape. She sat carefully, unsure where to place her hands. The child talked excitedly about school and games, words spilling out freely. The man listened, asking questions, fully present. She realized she was witnessing something she rarely saw growing up, attention without distraction. They ate together quietly. The food wasn't perfect, but no one complained. Afterward, she helped wash dishes, even though he told her she didn't need to. "You're not used to this, are you?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "People usually do things for me." He nodded. Nothing wrong with learning something new. The words felt simple but meaningful. From that night on, their conversations grew longer. They talked about everyday things. Work, school, weather. Slowly, deeper topics found their way in. He spoke about losing his partner years ago, about learning how to raise a child alone while working long hours, about nights when he felt too tired to think, but still had to keep going. She listened quietly. She didn't interrupt or try to fix anything. For once, she didn't feel the need to perform. When it was her turn, she spoke carefully, about feeling invisible despite being seen everywhere, about being managed instead of understood, about how control felt like care to some people. He didn't judge her. He didn't compare their struggles. He simply listened. "Sounds lonely," he said. That single sentence made her throat tighten. As days passed, she began helping more around the building. Small things at first, carrying boxes, holding doors, helping elderly residents with groceries. No one asked her to. She just did it. The man noticed, but didn't make a big deal out of it. "Feels different, doesn't it?" he said one afternoon. She nodded. "It does." One evening, she received a call from her father. His voice was firm, controlled. He asked how she was doing. She answered honestly but briefly. He reminded her that this arrangement was temporary, that she needed to reflect on her behavior. For the first time, she didn't argue. After the call, she sat quietly in her apartment, staring at the wall. She realized something important. She wasn't changing because she was forced to. She was changing because she wanted to. The next morning, the building faced another issue. A power outage affected several floors. Residents gathered in the lobby, confused and frustrated. Some complained loudly. The man moved quickly, organizing temporary lights and guiding people safely. She stood beside him, handing out candles and water bottles. No one questioned her presence. No one ordered her around. She was simply part of the solution. When the power returned, a small round of applause filled the lobby. She felt her face grow warm, not from attention, but from belonging. Later, she and the man sat outside, watching the sky darken. "You ever wish things were easier?" she asked. "All the time," he replied. "But easy doesn't always make you strong." She thought about her old life, how easy it had been, how weak it sometimes made her feel. That night, she dreamed of her mother for the first time in years. Not sick or distant, but smiling. In the morning, she woke with a strange sense of peace. She didn't know how long she would stay in this building. She didn't know what her future would look like, but she knew one thing for sure. The walls she had built around herself were slowly breaking down, not because someone forced them to, but because someone had shown her another way. And the man who cleaned floors and raised a child alone had unknowingly become a mirror, reflecting a version of herself she never thought she could be. Something was changing, quietly, deeply, and there was no turning back. The change did not go unnoticed for long. Even quiet places have eyes, and even simple buildings have rules. One morning, as she walked through the lobby carrying a small box of supplies for the courtyard, she noticed two unfamiliar men standing near the reception desk. They wore neat suits that did not belong in this place. They spoke in low voices and checked their phones often. She felt it before she understood it. Something from her old life had followed her here. Later that day, the man was called into the building manager's office. He came out looking calm, but his eyes carried worry. She noticed immediately. "What happened?" she asked when they were alone. He hesitated. "Nothing serious. Just questions." She knew that tone. It was a sound of someone trying to protect others by keeping things light. That evening, she received a message from her father. He wanted to see her. Tomorrow. No excuses. She sat on her bed for a long time, staring at the wall. She had known this moment would come. Things had been too peaceful, too real. Her father did not like what he could not control. The next morning, she returned to the family home for the first time in weeks. Everything looked the same. Perfect. Cold. The staff greeted her politely, carefully. Her father waited in his office. He didn't waste time. He told her. He had been informed about her involvement in the building's daily matters. He spoke about boundaries, about image, about how certain people might misunderstand her presence. Then he mentioned the janitor. He asked why she was spending so much time with an employee. His words were calm, but the meaning was sharp. He warned her about getting emotionally attached to people who might take advantage of her kindness. She felt anger rise, but she stayed seated. "He hasn't taken anything from me," she said. "He's shown me respect." Her father sighed. He said respect could be faked, that people with nothing often wanted something. For the first time, she spoke without fear. She told him he didn't know this man. She told him he didn't know her either. The meeting ended without shouting. That worried her more than anger would have. When she returned to the building, things felt different. The man avoided long conversations. He worked faster, kept his head down. The child stayed closer to him than usual. She finally confronted him. They talked to you because of me, didn't they? He didn't answer right away. Then he nodded. They asked questions about my work, about my intentions. Her chest tightened. I didn't want this. I know, he said, but this is how your world works. That sentence hurt more than accusation. The next few days were heavy. Residents whispered. Management changed schedules. The man was reassigned to night shifts temporarily. The child stayed with a neighbor during those hours. She felt responsible for everything. One night, she found him sitting alone in the courtyard after his shift, staring at the ground. I'm sorry, she said quietly. He looked up. You don't need to apologize for being yourself, but you're paying the price. He nodded slowly. I've paid prices before. I'll survive this too. The calm in his voice broke her. The following week, her father's assistant visited the building. She did not hide this time. She met him openly. She told him she would not return home yet, that she was learning things here. She could not learn anywhere else. The assistant warned her about consequences, about reduced allowances, about public misunderstanding. She listened. Then she said something she had never said before. I'm okay with that. The words felt terrifying and freeing. That evening, she told the man everything, about her father's pressure, about the choices ahead. He listened quietly. You don't owe me anything, he said when she finished. Whatever you choose should be for you. That was the hardest part. He wasn't trying to keep her. He wasn't trying to control her. The building faced another challenge soon after, a surprise inspection. Tension filled the halls. The man worked harder than ever, making sure everything was perfect. She helped quietly, staying out of the spotlight. When the inspection ended with no issues, relief spread. Later that night, she stood on the rooftop, looking at the city. The man joined her after finishing his shift. You could leave, he said gently. No one would blame you. She shook her head. I don't want to run anymore. Silence sat between them, comfortable and heavy. She realized something important then. Real change comes with cost, and real connection comes with risk. Her father's world was powerful, but this world was honest. She didn't know how the story would end. She only knew she would not go back to being controlled by fear. And whatever came next, she would face it with open eyes. The air felt different after that night on the rooftop. Not lighter, not heavier. Just clear. She had made a choice inside herself. Even if she had not said out loud yet, she was no longer trying to prove anything. Not to her father. Not to the people who once followed her every move. She only wanted to understand who she was without noise around her. The next morning, she woke up early and walked through the building slowly. She noticed small things again. A crack in the wall near the stairs. A loose tile by the entrance. The child's drawings taped carefully near the apartment door. She realized something simple but powerful. This place was not perfect, but it was honest. Nothing was hidden under expensive decorations. Later that week, her father came to the building himself. He did not bring cameras. He did not bring assistants. Just one driver who waited outside. When he stepped into the lobby, conversation slowed. People recognized authority, even when it tried to stay quiet. She was in the courtyard helping arrange chairs for a small weekend gathering residents had planned. When she saw him, her hands froze for a second. He looked around, taking in the space. Children playing, neighbors talking, the man fixing a broken bench near the wall. They stood facing each other, not as businessman and daughter, but as two people who had avoided an honest conversation for years. I wanted to see for myself, her father said. She nodded. Now you have. He walked slowly through the courtyard. He noticed the man working. Their eyes met briefly. There was no anger in the man's face, only calm. Her father finally spoke again. Is this what you want? This life? She thought carefully before answering. I don't know what my whole life will look like, she said. but I know I don't want to live only to protect an image. He looked at her for a long moment. For the first time, she saw uncertainty in his eyes. I try to give you everything, he said quietly. You gave me everything except time, she replied, her voice steady. The words were not meant to hurt. They were simply true. Silence stretched between them, but it was not angry. It was thoughtful. Across the courtyard, the child ran toward the man, laughing loudly about something small and unimportant. The sound filled the space. Her father watched the scene. He saw the way the man bent down to listen, the way he smiled without distraction. Something shifted in his expression. That afternoon, they sat together on a bench. No assistants, no schedules, just father and daughter. She told him how she had felt growing up, not neglected in money, but in emotion. She explained that rebellion was easier than asking for attention, that being called out of control sometimes felt better than being invisible. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he spoke more softly than she had ever heard. I thought discipline would protect you, he said. I didn't realize distance would damage you. It was not a perfect apology, but it was honest. Before leaving, her father asked to speak with the man privately. She felt nervous but did not interfere. They stood near the entrance, talking quietly. No raised voices, no threats, just conversation. Later, the man told her what was said. He asked about my work, he said, about my child, about why I never tried to use your name for anything. She looked down, and I told him I don't build my life on someone else's power. She smiled, feeling proud without needing to say it. A few days later, changes began happening quietly. The building received funding for improvements, not flashy upgrades, but practical ones. Better lighting, safer stair rails, a small play area for children. The residents were told it was part of a new community support program. Her father did not take credit publicly. He did not mention her name. The man kept his job. His schedule returned to normal. The whispers faded. One evening, as the sun set behind the buildings, the residents gathered for a small celebration of the new play area. There was simple food, laughter, and music from someone's old speaker. She stood near the side, watching children run freely in the new space. The child waved at her excitedly. You helped make this happen, the man said quietly beside her. She shook her head. No, I just stopped running. For the first time in a long while, she felt steady. Weeks later, she made another decision. She would return home, but not as the same person. She would continue her studies properly. She would take interest in the family business, but with a different goal. She wanted to build programs that supported employees and their families. She wanted to create spaces where people felt seen. When she told the man, he nodded with quiet pride. You don't need anyone to control you, he said. You just needed someone to understand you. She looked at him, grateful beyond words. Their connection did not turn into something dramatic. It did not need to. It remained built on respect and shared growth. On her last evening before moving back home, she sat in her small apartment one final time. The walls were still plain, the furniture still simple. But she was not the same girl who had walked in weeks ago. She had learned that control is not strength. That wealth without presence feels empty. That real power comes from listening. When she stepped outside with her suitcase the next morning, residents wished her well. The child hugged her tightly. Don't forget us, the child said. She smiled. I won't. As the car drove away, she looked back at the building one last time. Nobody could control her, not because she was wild or rebellious, but because she had finally learned to guide herself. And everything had changed not because of money, but because one honest connection showed her who she could become.